Firstly, Henry, what do we make of developments in relation to this climate emergency and this almost heightened awareness now of the environment and human impact on the environment?
Well, I think we need to use this heightened awareness, which is to some extent why I'm here speaking. So we've got a government that's going to respond to public opinion. That is their purpose as a democratic government, and that's what they're doing. I think they also need to know that the public are supportive of anything they do and are going to cooperate with anything they do. So it's not just a case of let the state do everything. It's a case of we're all in this together.
And you've got a background, or come from a background in renewable energy, say, sort of broadly speaking. I've heard you mention the Isle of Man's renewable resources as green gold. Why do you think that hasn't been utilised as of yet?
Well, I don't think there was an incentive. If you compare us, for example, to another country that's about to go carbon neutral and plastic free, which is Costa Rica, they were surrounded by mass destruction and logging by neighbouring countries. And I think we just haven't had that incentive. We've lived relatively freely in our ignorance here. So there hasn't been a need, and of course we did until recently have seemingly large reserves of North Sea oil and then subsequently gas. But we've got to a stage now where if we're really talking about fracking, then clearly resources are now dwindling in those areas.
Not necessarily an appropriate means or energy source at this time, would you argue?
So are we talking about the fracking? Fracking, I would say it's totally inappropriate. You're really clutching at straws if you have to pump a high pressure and you have to actually cause such a disturbance just for small amounts. I mean, this is inappropriate, but it's indicative of the fact that our reserves are dwindling in fossil fuels.
Of course, there is this particular section off the coast of Mackle Head, which has come under the spotlight of late because both Ørsted, formerly Dong Energy, and Kroger, a local firm, are effectively looking to cooperate and work alongside each other in their various ventures. I suppose, how are they going to cooperate?
I can't speak on behalf of the companies. Ultimately, this is a decision for the government to issue planning permission to utilise the seabed. It has to be a sufficient contract for the entire lifetime of the wind farm to make it a viable option for them to then gain contracts to sell their electricity.
Let's talk about wind anyway, because your petition basically states that the Isle of Man can go carbon neutral within 3 years' time. That's incredibly ambitious. Why do you think that's a realistic target? Because currently government are looking to go net carbon neutral by 2050, which some have argued that's not necessarily a proportionate response to an emergency, say, and I suppose an ambitious target like that seems more proportionate, yet at the same time quite unrealistic.
No one's come back to me and said it's unrealistic from that point of view. Certainly no one from the government. I would say that you have to aim for the best, otherwise what's the point? If you aim for a small target, you'll probably achieve that small target. In terms of actually assembling a turbine, it can be done in 24 hours, and it has been done in the areas of North Wales. So obviously there's a process that goes with it, but how much of that process is delayed by bureaucracy? So it can be done.
So what are the obstacles to having the Isle of Man having an offshore wind turbine within the next 3 years? Because we're talking about an agreement for lease that took place 4 years ago with Ørsted, and we look out the window and there's nothing there.
I don't think there's been the will in the government to do it. I think the obstacles have probably been political, and political is also based on the will of the people. There are obviously investments that have been made based on what was then a viable and reasonable research, And so the investment in the Pulrose power station, gas power station, was based on when costs for wind were 18 pence a kilowatt hour, and now they're down to 5.7 in the UK. So there's obviously been a change over that period of time since 2010. So I presume this is part of the obstacle, that there is a huge amount invested in this, approximately £4,500 per head of population debt, I believe.
And what about public opinion? Because, of course, wind turbines are, to some, a blot on the landscape, and to others, an example of innovation and harnessing natural resource. Where is the public opinion on this at the moment?
I'm sure it's divided, but what are we prepared to accept if we really want change? We probably wouldn't want to be underneath such a large turbine, but offshore at least there's less resistance. It becomes a matter of visual taste, but a lot of things that we consider a blot on nature initially then turn out to be something that we accept. We are, for example, obviously people doing great strides to restore the Ramsey Pier, but it's not a natural feature, it's a human-made feature. On the other hand, people now see it enhances the environment, so it's all about perception. I think in time people will come to appreciate that they are using a non-fossil fuel energy source.
In relation to your deadline of 2022, am I right?
That's right.
Of the Isle of Man achieving carbon neutrality, how do you plan on achieving that? Is this a one-man team, or are you planning on sort of conversations with the MUA? Have you got investors? What is the motivation behind this?
This is purely a personal action. I'm not working on behalf of any company. I'm totally independent. This is more to permit the government to consider these options rather than to feel that they're still scratching around, fearful of what how the public might respond, and to also to say that there are people on this island willing to take on the challenge. I'm specifically talking about a single wind farm here. It won't give us directly all the energy needs we have here, because we obviously use, we have cars that run on diesel and petrol. We have other structures, not just electricity. Electricity is only sort of a 20% or so of our usage. However, we're looking globally here, and we're looking at the fact that we want to offset our greenhouse gas emissions here, so that we are effectively carbon neutral, even though it does mean trading between countries, and trading initially with the UK, but I mean ultimately there will be a European-wide network, because we have to. And just so happens that if you look at the wind resource map of the world, coloured from blue, which is calm, to deep red, which is the strongest resource of wind energy, there's this huge blot of red across parts of Northern Europe coastline, and particularly across the British Isles. We have a phenomenal resource to supply a very large market, the European market. So in that sense, we have a responsibility to do our bit, because our resources are so much greater than others.